further I drove into the hills, the more the mist closed in.
It was close to midnight when I left my uncle's house that night. He lived out past Elkins, deep in the hills where the roads twist through the trees like veins, and the fog rolls in thick and low after dark. I remember him telling me not to take the old route back to town. Said it wasn't safe, too many deer, too much fog, and too few people. But I've always hated the interstate. Something about the quiet of backroads calms me, makes me feel like I'm still connected to the land I grew up on. That night, though, that road made me feel anything but calm. The fog was already creeping through the valley by the time I got to the first bend. It hung heavy, glowing faintly in the beams of my headlights. I could barely see 20 feet ahead, and the reflectors along the shoulder, those small white ones mounted on rusted metal poles, were the only things keeping me between the lines. I'd driven that route maybe 100 times before, but that night, the silence was different. The crickets had gone quiet. The only sound was the steady hum of my tires and the occasional pop of gravel when I drifted too close to the edge. After about 10 minutes, I noticed something strange. One of the reflectors up ahead wasn't glowing like the others. It looked taller, wider, like someone was standing next to it. At first, I thought it might just be a trick of the fog, or maybe one of those mile markers leaning at an odd angle. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't that at all. There was a man standing there. He was facing the woods, not the road. Completely still, arms hanging at his sides. My first thought was that maybe he'd wrecked or broken down. I slowed the car, leaning forward over the wheel to get a better look. The fog caught his outline. Long hair, heavy jacket, jeans soaked dark down the legs. I couldn't see his face yet, but I felt something in my chest tighten anyway. I rolled the window down halfway and called out, "Hey, you all right?" He didn't move. Didn't even twitch. I crept closer, maybe 15 feet away now, headlights washing over him. His clothes glistened like they were dripping wet, but the road itself was dry. Not a drop of rain had fallen all day. That's when he turned toward me. His face, I'll never forget that face, was pale, almost gray, and slick with moisture. His eyes were sunken, like he hadn't slept in days, and his lips hung open just enough that I could see the whites of his teeth. He didn't blink, didn't make a sound. He just stared directly into my headlights, directly at me. Something about it felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. Every instinct told me to keep driving. I pressed the gas gently, easing the car past him, expecting him to step back or wave. But he didn't. He turned slowly as I passed, following me with his head until he was out of sight. My heart was hammering. I kept glancing in the mirrors, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Then I saw him step onto the road. In the red glow of my taillights, I watched his shape move from the shoulder and start walking down the middle of the lane, toward me. Not running, just walking, one slow step after another. I slammed the gas pedal and didn't look back again for miles. When I finally started to calm down, I told myself it had to have been a drifter. Maybe someone who'd been caught in the fog and lost their way. But the thought of how dry the air felt inside my car, compared to how soaked he looked, it didn't sit right. I turned on the radio for some noise, but every station was static. Even the local AM channel was dead silent. About 20 minutes later, I rounded a bend and noticed something ahead, the faint shimmer of more reflectors. I eased off the gas, watching the pattern of white dots on either side of the road. That's when I saw another figure. Same distance from the road, same posture, same stillness. My stomach dropped. It couldn't be. I slowed down again, headlights cutting through the mist. This one was facing the woods too, his shoulders hunched slightly forward. For a second, I convinced myself it was just another traveler. Maybe even the same guy who somehow beat me there. But that didn't make sense. I'd been doing 60 for the last half hour. I tried to ignore it. Kept my eyes forward, refusing to slow down this time. As I passed, though, I couldn't help glancing out the window. It was the same man, same pale skin, same soaked clothes, same motionless stance. And when my headlights hit him, he turned, exactly the same way as before. That's when panic really started to set in. I floored it, trying to push the thought out of my head. I told myself it was the fog, that I was tired, that maybe I'd imagined the details. But the further I went, the worse the feeling got. Every shadow along the road looked like it could be him. Every reflector seemed just slightly off until I passed it. The third time I saw him, I nearly drove off the road. He was standing in the middle of a long, straight stretch, right beside a caution deer crossing sign. No fog there, just open blacktop and trees on both sides. His outline was perfectly clear in the beams. This time, his head was tilted slightly upward, like he'd been waiting for me. I slammed the brakes, skidding to a stop maybe 30 feet away. The car idled, shaking in the quiet. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely keep my grip on the steering wheel. I blinked hard, expecting him to vanish, but he didn't. He started walking toward me. I threw the car in reverse, tires squealing as I backed up, but I couldn't look away. He wasn't running, just pacing forward, deliberate, unbothered. Each step echoed faintly off the road, though I couldn't hear the crunch of gravel or the rustle of fabric. It was like the sound came from somewhere else entirely. When he was 10 feet away, I shifted into drive and gunned it. The car shot forward, and I swerved wide around him, barely missing his shoulder. As I passed, I caught one last glimpse of his face in the window, expressionless, like a reflection caught in dirty glass. I didn't stop again that night. When I finally pulled into town, I parked outside a diner that was still lit up, stumbled inside and ordered coffee just to calm my nerves. The waitress asked if I was okay, said I looked pale as death. I told her what I saw, or tried to. She didn't say much, just frowned and told me I wasn't the first to talk about a man on that road. Said truckers sometimes saw him too, always in the fog, always near the reflectors. I didn't believe her at first. But when I went back the next morning, the fog had burned off and the road was quiet again. I drove slow, watching every shoulder, every bend. Nothing. Just trees and sunlight and the dull glint of metal poles. Then I reached the spot where I'd seen him the first time. One of the reflectors there was missing. The post was bent clean in half, like something had struck it hard. Around it, the dirt looked damp, darker than the rest, like it had soaked up water. I crouched down, touched the ground, and realized it wasn't wet with rain. It was cold, freezing cold like the surface of ice. When I straightened up, I saw movement farther down the road. Just a shimmer, barely visible in the heat rising off the asphalt. For a second, it looked like someone standing still by the next curve. I got back in the car and left. To this day, I don't drive that route anymore. I take the interstate even if it adds an hour to the trip. But sometimes late at night when the fog rolls through town and the streetlights catch it just right, I see shapes in the mist, tall, still figures by the roadside, facing the woods. And if I blink for even a second, I swear I can see the glint of a white reflector just beside them. I used to run medical supplies across 3 counties for a logistics company that didn't pay me nearly enough for the hours I drove. It was lonely work. Long stretches of road with only the sound of the tires beneath me and the hum of the engine to keep me company. Most nights were uneventful, but every now and then, something strange happened out there in the dark. The kind of thing you can't explain to anyone without them giving you that look, like you've lost your mind. This one night, though, was different. I've never found a way to talk about it that doesn't sound crazy. It was a little past 2 in the morning, middle of October. The fog was thin but steady, clinging low to the road like it was alive. I just passed through a small town called Browder's Hollow. Nothing more than a few shuttered stores and a gas station that hadn't been open in years. From there, I had about an hour of forest roads before I hit the main highway. No traffic, no lights, just miles of cracked pavement and darkness. I remember thinking how quiet it was. So quiet that I could hear my own breathing, even over the radio. That's when I saw the headlights. They came up from behind me like a pair of distant stars, faint at first but growing larger by the second. I figured it was another delivery truck or maybe a farmer heading home late. But something about the way they moved bothered me. They didn't bounce or shift like normal headlights do on uneven roads. They stayed perfectly level, locked in behind me. After a few miles, they got closer. Too close. The glare filled my rearview mirror, forcing me to angle it away. I was doing about 55, and whoever it was matched me exactly. I sped up, 60-65, and the lights stayed glued to my bumper. I slowed down to 40, and they adjusted right along with me. No horn, no attempt to pass, just that constant presence behind me. Finally, I decided to pull over and let them go around. There was a wide shoulder coming up near a stand of pines. I flicked on my blinker and eased to the side, gravel crunching under my tires. The headlights slowed too, hanging back for a moment before shifting left like they were going to pass. When they pulled alongside, I got my first good look at it. It wasn't a pickup or a delivery van. It was a full-sized semi, a massive rust-streaked thing with a white cab and an old weathered trailer. The kind you'd expect to see hauling lumber or steel. But as it rolled past, I realized something was wrong. The windows were dark, almost tinted black, but not quite enough to hide what was inside. There was no one in the driver's seat. No shape. No movement. Nothing. Just the faint orange glow of something flickering inside the cab, like the ember of a cigarette burning in the dark. I froze, watching it pass in slow motion. The engine made no real noise, just a low hum that didn't sound right for something that size. I could see the taillights glowing red as it drifted ahead of me, perfectly steady, before pulling back into my lane and continuing on. For a while, I just sat there, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Maybe the driver was slumped down, maybe it was a reflection, maybe I was too tired. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. There was no movement in that cab, just that strange pulsing light. I started driving again, keeping my distance. The truck stayed about 200 yards ahead, never speeding up or slowing down. Every time I rounded a curve, I half expected it to vanish, but it was always there. Those twin red lights floating just above the road, steady and unwavering. About 15 minutes later, the road forked. Left went toward the highway. Right led down an old side road I hadn't seen in years. Route 19, I think. That stretch used to lead to an old timber bridge before it collapsed back in the late 90s. No one used it anymore. I watched as the truck reached the intersection, flicked on a turn signal, and drifted right onto the dead road. I slowed down, staring in disbelief. I knew that route ended barely a mile in. I thought about letting it go, but something in me needed to know. Needed to see where it was going. So I turned too. The pavement on Route 19 was cracked and overgrown. The trees pressed close, their branches arching over the road like a tunnel. My headlights bounced off patches of fog that seemed to move against the wind. I could see the truck's taillights far ahead, glowing faintly between the trunks, leading me deeper into the woods. It felt like I was following a ghost. A few minutes later, I saw the guardrails of the old bridge come into view. They were half collapsed, twisted metal eaten by rust. The truck slowed but didn't stop. It kept rolling forward until its front tires reached the edge, and then for a moment, it just idled there. I could see that same orange light flickering in the cab, like someone was still sitting inside. Deciding what to do, then it lurched forward. I slammed on my brakes, skidding to a stop as the semi rolled straight onto the broken bridge. I expected to hear the crash, the sound of metal tearing as it went over, but there was nothing. No sound, no splash, no impact. Just silence. The red lights faded into the fog and were gone. I sat there, shaking, staring at the empty space where it had been. The night was completely still again. Even the insects had gone quiet. Eventually, I forced myself to inch closer, stopping a few feet from the edge. The bridge was gone, just a jagged drop into the ravine below. There were no skid marks, no wreckage, no broken boards. Just fresh tire tracks leading up to the void and ending in midair. That was enough for me. I turned around and didn't stop until I was back on the main road. I called my supervisor to tell him I'd be late on delivery, but I didn't say why. How could I? The next morning, I drove back with the sheriff from Browder's Hollow. He didn't say much during the ride, just chewed on a toothpick and stared out the window. When we got there, the tire tracks were still visible in the dirt, clear as day. He knelt down, ran his hand along them, and frowned. "These weren't here yesterday," he said quietly. "And that bridge. Hasn't seen a vehicle in 20 years. He stood up and looked at me. "You said you saw lights?" "Headlights," I told him. "And something glowing in the cab." "Like a cigarette." He nodded slowly, then gestured toward the woods. "My dad used to haul lumber through here. Said there was a driver who went off that bridge one foggy night. Never found the truck, never found him. Folks around here say sometimes you still see his rig when the fog's thick enough." He looked at me hard, like he wanted to see if I believed him. "Maybe now you know what he meant." We left after that. I didn't say another word. A week later, I quit that job. I told them the hours were too much, which wasn't a lie. But the real reason was that I couldn't get that image out of my head. Those lights, that silent cab, and the way the road just swallowed it whole. Sometimes I still drive at night, though not for work. And every once in a while, I catch sight of distant headlights behind me. Too bright, too steady, keeping perfect distance no matter how I speed or slow down. I tell myself it's just another driver. But if I ever see that faint orange glow again, I won't wait to find out where it's going, because I already know. It was late October, a little after midnight, when my car gave out on Route 56. I just finished a double shift at the plant, exhausted but determined to make it home before sunrise. The road was empty, just miles of cracked pavement twisting through the hollers, past dead trees and forgotten towns. My headlights cut through the fog in two pale beams, and for the first time that night, I realized how quiet it was out there. Not peaceful quiet, the kind that presses against your eardrums, makes you too aware of your own heartbeat. When the engine sputtered and died, I coasted to a stop right beneath an old overpass, a crumbling stretch of concrete covered in moss and graffiti. I remember how the bridge seemed out of place there, like it had been abandoned by time. The walls were streaked with dark stains that looked almost black in my headlights, and the pillars beneath it were thick with vines. The air smelled like wet rock and rust. I tried the ignition a few times, but it just clicked and coughed. Dead battery. I sighed and pulled out my phone, calling the nearest tow service in town. The dispatcher said someone would be there in about 30 minutes. 30 minutes didn't sound so bad, until I realized there wasn't a single house or light in sight. Just trees, fog, and the old bridge looming overhead. I left the headlights on for comfort. That little pocket of light made the night feel less predatory. I leaned back in the seat, trying to relax. But the longer I sat there, the more uneasy I felt. The bridge seemed to hum faintly, a low vibration that I could almost feel through the steering wheel. I figured it was just the wind funneling through the gaps. Except there wasn't any wind. The fog hung completely still, like the world was holding its breath. About 10 minutes in, I started to hear it. At first, I thought it was the radio picking up interference, a soft static hum that rose and fell like someone whispering too close to the mic. I turned it off, but the sound didn't stop. It was coming from outside, from under the bridge. The whispers were faint, overlapping voices, low and hurried, like people trying not to be heard. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, trying to see if someone was out there. Maybe some kids drinking under the bridge, but there was nothing. Just the pale gray of fog and the gleam of wet concrete. Then I heard my name, clear as day, from somewhere in that darkness. Just one word, my name, drawn out slow, almost questioning. The sound was quiet, but it cut through the night like it was whispered right next to my ear. I froze. My first thought was that it had to be someone messing with me. Maybe the tow driver had arrived early, trying to spook me for a laugh. I stepped out of the car and called out, "Hello?" The moment my voice echoed off the bridge, the whisper stopped. Dead silent. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, listening. My breath came out in clouds. That's when I noticed how cold it had gotten. The temperature dropped fast, like I'd stepped into a walk-in freezer. My skin prickled and a heaviness settled in my chest like the air had thickened. I backed toward the car, keeping my eyes on the shadows under the bridge. Then, from the dark, another voice answered. "You hear us now?" It wasn't a question said to me. It was wrong, like a voice you'd hear in a dream, stretched, hollow, and too calm. I felt my legs go weak. I slammed the car door shut and locked it. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for the ignition again, knowing full well the car wouldn't start. That's when my phone died. Not low battery, just straight to black. I tried the flashlight. Nothing. The whispers came back, closer this time. They didn't sound like one or two people anymore. It was dozens, overlapping, weaving through each other like wind in tall grass. I couldn't make out the words, but they carried tone, pleading, warning, almost mournful. I thought I could hear crying somewhere in the mix. I pulled my knees up on the seat and stared out the windshield, refusing to blink. I kept expecting to see shapes moving under the bridge, but all I saw was fog. Thick, swirling fog that seemed to pulse in rhythm with those voices. Every so often I'd catch a flicker of movement, like someone passing between the pillars, but when I focused, it vanished. Minutes stretched like hours. I must have sat there for 20, maybe 30 minutes, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. The fog outside had turned into a wall, swallowing everything beyond the reach of the headlights. I started talking to myself just to break the silence, anything to drown out those faint, rising whispers. Then something landed on my trunk. It wasn't subtle. A heavy thud shook the whole car, followed by the sound of metal bending under weight. I screamed without meaning to. The rear of the car dipped slightly, like someone was sitting or crouching on it. I could hear a faint scraping sound, nails or maybe boots dragging across the paint. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I wanted to look. God, I wanted to look. But some part of me knew I shouldn't. So I sat there, staring straight ahead, tears stinging my eyes. The whispers outside grew louder, circling the car, filling the air with broken words and fragments of breath. I thought I heard laughter, soft, breathless, like a child's. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The pressure on the trunk lifted. The air seemed to lighten again, and the fog began to thin. I waited a long time before I dared to move. Eventually, the sound of an approaching engine broke through the quiet. Headlights cut through the fog from down the road, bright, warm light that washed over me like a wave of relief. It was the tow truck. When the driver stepped out, I practically fell out of my car, trying to explain what happened. He just looked at me, tired eyes, old face, and asked where the damage was. I pointed to the trunk. He walked around to check and whistled low. There was a dent right in the center, like someone had dropped a concrete block on it. He crouched down, shining his flashlight over the metal. "No prints," he muttered. "No dirt, no scuffs. Whatever hit you wasn't standing on the ground." That sentence made something cold crawl up my spine. He didn't ask questions after that. Just hooked the car up and told me to ride with him. I sat in silence the whole drive back, staring at the fog rolling in the headlights. Halfway to town, I thought I heard it again. Faint, almost drowned out by the engine. My name, whispered from somewhere behind us. I didn't say a word. The next day, I went back to the mechanic to grab my things from the car. In the daylight, the bridge looked ordinary, just old concrete and weeds. But when I leaned down to look under it, I noticed something on the pillar. Faint words carved into the surface, old and worn smooth by rain. "We hear you now." I stood there staring, heart pounding in my throat. I wanted to tell myself it was graffiti from some kid years ago. But something about the way the letters were etched, deep, deliberate, made me think otherwise. Sometimes, when I drive past that area, I roll up the windows and turn off the radio. Just to listen. And every once in a while, if the fog's thick enough, I swear I can still hear them. Those soft, restless voices beneath the overpass, whispering like they're waiting for someone to answer. Writing? I still remember that night like it's carved into the back of my mind. The kind of memory that sticks with you no matter how much you drink, pray, or try to convince yourself it never happened. It was late October, one of those Appalachian rains that doesn't just fall, it devours the night. I'd been working a double shift at the hardware store in Boone and was heading back home through the winding back roads that cut between the mountains. My windshield wipers were slapping back and forth like they were fighting for their lives, and the fog was so thick that my high beams just made it worse. The road shimmered under the downpour, and every few minutes, I caught the distorted reflection of my own headlights bouncing off puddles like ghostly eyes staring back at me. I was halfway between towns when I saw her, a figure standing near the guardrail, her head bowed, rain streaming down a long white coat that clung to her body. I almost didn't believe what I was seeing. No one should have been out there that time of night, not in that kind of storm. I eased off the gas, the car tires hissing over the slick asphalt. My gut told me to keep going. But something, guilt maybe, or just plain curiosity, had made me pull over. The woman didn't move until I rolled the window down halfway and leaned toward the passenger seat. Her face was pale in the glow of the dashboard, hair plastered to her cheeks, and her eyes. They looked like they hadn't seen sleep in years. She opened the passenger door slowly, almost cautiously, and slid inside without a word. Rainwater pooled at her feet, soaking into the rubber mats. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible over the storm. Her voice was flat, not scared, not relieved. Just empty. I told her no problem, that no one deserved to be walking out there in that weather. She didn't answer, just stared out the windshield as if watching something I couldn't see. I tried asking where she was headed. After a moment, she pointed down the road. "Just near the crossroads," she said softly. "You'll know it when you see it." We drove in silence for a while, the only sound being the rain hammering the roof and the low hum of the tires cutting through puddles. Every few seconds the lightning would flash and her reflection would flicker in the window, motionless, expressionless. Then out of nowhere she asked, "You drive this road often?" I nodded. "Yeah, I live just past the next ridge." She smiled barely. "You'll see me again." That's all she said. I remember my stomach tightening, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it, calm, certain, like a promise she'd made 1,000 times before. When we reached the crossroads, the rain had eased into a mist and the fog rolled in heavy. She told me to stop. There was no house, no streetlight, not even a mailbox. Just two roads intersecting beneath a bent stop sign and a row of trees that looked like they were leaning in to listen. She opened the door and stepped out without another word. I leaned over and called after her, but she was already walking down into the fog, her white coat glowing faintly in my headlights until it vanished. I waited there for a few seconds, not sure why, then finally drove off. I thought about her all week. Every time I passed that spot on the road, I found myself glancing toward the guardrail, expecting to see her again. But it wasn't until 3 nights later that I did. Same rain, same lonely road, same exact place. She was standing there again. Same soaked coat, same posture, thumb out just like before. My stomach dropped. I slowed down out of instinct, trying to convince myself maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe she lived nearby, maybe she'd just gotten stuck again. But when my headlights caught her face, she turned and looked directly at me with that faint, knowing smile. I don't know why, but I hit the brakes. My car came to a stop about 20 feet away from her. And that's when I saw it. Her reflection wasn't in the side mirror. I blinked, rubbed at the fogged glass, thinking maybe I was seeing things. But she was still there in the rain, watching me, that same little smile still playing on her lips. I should have driven off. Every part of me screamed to leave, but something held me there, some twisted mix of fascination and dread. Slowly, she began to walk toward the car, her steps quiet against the wet asphalt. I shifted into reverse, but the gear stick jammed like it was frozen. My engine sputtered, the headlights dimmed. She stopped beside the passenger window and leaned down, her face inches from the glass. For a moment, all I could see were her eyes, not angry, not sad, just hollow, like something long gone from this world. Then, just as lightning split the sky, she vanished. The passenger door handle clicked. I swear to God it moved on its own. I slammed the locks down and threw the car into gear. It roared back to life, and I tore off down that road faster than I ever have in my life. When I finally made it home, I sat in the driveway for a good 10 minutes before I could bring myself to get out. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely shut the door behind me. The next morning, I checked the car. Muddy footprints on the passenger floorboard, the seat still damp. But there was one more thing that made my blood run cold. My side mirror, the one she hadn't appeared in, was cracked clean down the middle. A week later, I drove that same road again, only this time in daylight. I stopped at the crossroads where I'd dropped her off. The asphalt there was warped, the guardrail bent like something had hit it years ago. And just beyond it, through the weeds and broken gravel, I noticed the remnants of a wooden cross sticking out of the earth, weathered and gray. Someone had carved a name into it, though the letters were hard to make out. All I could read was Lydia. No flowers, no offerings. Just a forgotten marker by the road. I stood there in silence. The wind moving softly through the trees, and for a second, I could have sworn I heard something faint beneath it. A whisper almost drowned out by the rustling leaves. It wasn't words, just a sound that felt like breath brushing against my ear. I turned back toward my car, ready to leave, but before I did, I caught one last glimpse in the rearview mirror. Just behind the guardrail, for a split second, a figure in a white coat standing still in the rain, smiling that same faint smile. And then she was gone. I've stopped driving that road at night. Some things aren't meant to be seen twice.